Episode 1. The Arrival of the Bible. They said it was never meant to be found. Not in a church. Not in a library. But beneath the rotting floorboards of a brothel that had burned down a century ago. The fire had swallowed the building whole, leaving behind little more than ash and charred bones. Yet somehow, untouched by flame or decay, the Bible was there. Its leather cover unscorched, its golden edges gleaming faintly in the dark rubble. The workers who uncovered it whispered among themselves. None dared to open it. They swore the book breathed, as if the pages themselves exhaled in the silence of the ruins. The Bible was taken to the town's church, placed carefully upon the altar. Father Elias, the parish priest, welcomed it as a divine sign. A book preserved by fire, he proclaimed, must be a gift from God. He didn't notice how the congregation shifted uncomfortably, as though something unseen had just entered the room with them. That night, a thief broke into the church. He had no love for holy things. He wanted only gold, candle holders, anything that could be sold in secret. But when his hand brushed against the Bible, something strange happened. The pages rustled though no wind stirred, and a voice, low, velvet, and wet, spoke his name. The thief froze. No one should have known his name here. No one should have known the crime he had just committed in another town. And yet the voice whispered every detail of his sin, with the tenderness of a lover. He dropped the candle he carried, shaking violently. His knees buckled before the altar. "Who's there?" he hissed into the shadows. But the church was silent. Only the Bible waited, its pages still fluttering as if laughing. At dawn, Father Elias found the thief collapsed on the floor, muttering to himself, eyes wide as though he had stared too long into hell. The priest bent down, trying to pry the book from his trembling hands. But when Elias touched the Bible, the pages fell still. No voice came. Nothing. It was then he realized the whispers were not for him. The Bible did not speak to the righteous. It only spoke to sinners. And in that revelation, Father Elias felt something colder than fear. He felt curiosity. Because if the book revealed sins, perhaps it could purify the town. Perhaps it could expose what lay hidden in every dark corner. But as the sun rose over the church and the thief screamed the same name again and again in terror, Father Elias could not shake one thought. What if the Bible was never a gift from God, but a trap left for mankind? Episode 2. The First Whisper. The thief swore he would never return to the church. But sinners always come back to what condemns them. 3 nights later, he crept through the side door, breath sour with fear, pockets heavy with coins stolen from a farmer's purse. He told himself he wasn't afraid of a book. He told himself no voice could hurt him. But still, his hands shook as he lit a candle. The Bible waited on the altar. Its cover glistened like skin under sweat. The air smelled of ashes, though the candles burned clean. He opened it. The pages moved like the lungs of something alive. And then it began, soft, low, intimate, a whisper. Thief, coward, liar. The voice was not thunder. It was not wrath. It was silk sliding against his ears. It spoke his name again, dragging it out like a confession. Then it told him of the blood on his hands, of the girl who had seen him steal, of the lie he had whispered into her mouth to keep her silent. He staggered back. No one knows that. No one. His shout echoed through the empty church, but the Bible laughed, not with words, but with the rustle of pages that sounded too much like teeth. The thief tried to shut it. The cover slammed down, but the whisper did not stop. It seeped through the wood, through the air, straight into his skull. "Tell them, or I will." He ran. The candle toppled. Hot wax spilled across the altar like melted flesh. He didn't care. His screams carried out into the streets. Windows opened. People stared as he clutched his head, shrieking that the Bible knew him. By morning, his body was found at the edge of the river. His lips were blue, his eyes wide, his hands clamped around his ears as though trying to keep something inside. Father Elias blessed the corpse, but when he turned to the Bible, resting quietly on the altar, he noticed something new. The edges of its pages were red, as if they had been licked by blood. And in that silence, Elias asked himself the question no priest should dare whisper. What if the Bible did not need to be read, only listened to? Episode 3. The Priest Who Couldn't Hear. Father Elias could not ignore it anymore. The thief's corpse, the whispers people claimed to hear, the blood-tinged pages. The Bible was no ordinary relic. One night, when the church lay in silence, he locked the doors, lit a single candle, and placed the book before him. His hands trembled as he touched the cover. "Speak," he commanded. Nothing. He opened it. The candle flickered. The pages stirred faintly, as though stirred by breath. He leaned in, desperate. Still nothing. No whisper. No voice. His chest filled with anger. If this was the devil's trick, then surely it would speak to him, a priest chosen to defend his flock. He pressed his ear to the page. All he heard was the hiss of wax dripping from the candle. And then, footsteps. Not in the church. Inside his head. A young man from the village, drunk, broken, guilty, had staggered into the pews without Father Elias noticing. The man dropped to his knees, tears streaming. "Forgive me, Father," he begged, "for I have sinned." The Bible answered. Not to Elias, not to the church, but to the sinner. A whisper slithered through the air, wrapping around the man's sobs like a serpent around prey. His head jerked upward, eyes wide with horror. He covered his ears, but the whisper pressed harder, relentless. Elias reached across the altar, desperate to silence the book. To him, it was lifeless, silent parchment. To the man, it was a voice sharper than knives, recounting every hidden sin he had ever buried. The man screamed, "Stop, please stop!" His body convulsed against the pew, as though unseen hands pinned him down. Elias cried out, clutching the book. "In the name of Christ, be gone!" He slammed it shut. At once the man fell limp, gasping like one dragged back from drowning. But the priest knew the truth then. The Bible had ignored him because he was clean, or so he thought. It only spoke to those who carried darkness inside. And that night, as Father Elias prayed alone, a doubt began to gnaw at him. A doubt more poisonous than the whisper itself. What if he too had sins the book was waiting to reveal? Episode 4, The Confession That Answered Back. The confessional had always been a place of silence, a place where Father Elias spoke words of forgiveness, and sinners left lighter than they came. But that night the silence did not belong to him. A woman entered, her veil damp with tears. She knelt, trembling. Her voice quivered through the screen. "Forgive me, Father, for what I am about to confess." Elias whispered the prayer of absolution, his hand resting over the small Bible he had brought with him, the cursed one he had sworn to study. Its weight on his lap was heavier than stone. The woman began to speak. Her sins spilled out. Envy, betrayal, a secret affair with a man who now lay dead. But before Elias could respond, another voice rose from the darkness. Not hers, not his, the Bible's. It spoke through the screen with the softness of a lover's breath. But it was not absolution, it was mockery. "I was there," the whisper crooned. "I saw the blood on your hands. I heard the lies you whispered in the night. Do you think forgiveness will wash it away?" The woman froze. Her sobs turned into screams. "That's not you. Father, that's not your voice." Elias clutched the Bible, horrified. To him, the pages were still, silent. But the woman shrank back, clawing at her ears as though trying to tear the whisper out. "Confess everything," the voice urged. "Tell him about the child you left crying in the dark. Tell him about the grave no one knows." Her hands slammed against the wooden screen. "Make it stop! Please, make it stop!" Elias yanked the Bible shut, his heart hammering. The whisper ceased. The woman collapsed, gasping like a drowning soul pulled from black water. But the confessional no longer felt like holy ground. It felt like a tomb. When the woman stumbled out, her eyes burned with terror. She fled the church without blessing, without peace, leaving behind only the echo of her screams. And Father Elias sat alone in the dark booth, his hands clutching the book that had stolen his voice. That night he realized the Bible had claimed the power of confession. It no longer needed the priest. It was the priest. And for the first time in his life, Father Elias feared that forgiveness was no longer in his hands, but in the whispers of something far older, far crueler than God. Episode 5. The Child Who Was Innocent. Children have a way of silencing fear. Even in the darkest rooms, their laughter feels like light. That was why Father Elias let the orphan boy approach the altar. He wanted to prove the book harmless, that it was nothing more than ink and paper twisted by rumor. The boy's hands were small, still stained with dirt from the garden. He touched the Bible with curiosity, his wide eyes searching the priest's face for approval. Elias nodded, whispering, "Go on." The book did nothing. No rustle, no whisper, only silence. The boy flipped the pages, giggling at the golden edges, the strange smell of old leather. For him, the Bible was just that, a book, untouched, empty. Relief washed over Elias. Perhaps he had been wrong. Perhaps the whispers were madness, nothing more. But then the church doors creaked open. A drunk stumbled in. His clothes stank of wine and sweat. His eyes were hollow, carrying the weight of sins unspoken. He laughed when he saw the boy, laughed harder when he saw the Bible. "Let me touch it," the man slurred. "Let me hear what it has to say." Elias moved to stop him, but it was too late. The man's fingers slammed down on the open page. The boy saw nothing, but the man froze, paralyzed. His laughter died in his throat. His pupils dilated. His lips trembled as though kissed by a phantom. And then, the voice came. Not loud, not booming, but wet, intimate, curling into his ears like smoke. The man gasped. No, I never told anyone. How do you know?" The boy backed away, clutching Elias's robe, terrified. But the drunkard couldn't move. He pressed his palms to his ears, trying to shove the words out, but the whisper dug deeper, sharper, crueler. "Stop it!" he screamed. "Don't tell them. I buried her where no one would ever find her. Stop!" The words tore out of him, echoing through the church. The boy began to cry. Elias rushed forward, slamming the book shut. The drunkard collapsed to the floor, shaking, whispering to himself. His sins had been dragged into the open, not by choice, not by confession, but by force. Elias looked down at the Bible in horror. It had ignored the child. It had waited for sin. It had laughed when it found it. And in that moment, Elias understood something far more terrifying than the whispers themselves. The Bible was not here to forgive. It was here to hunt. Episode 6, The Whisper That Tempted. Sin is heavy, but promises are heavier. The merchant was known across the town for his greed. He counted coins like rosary beads, prayed not to God but to profit. When he heard whispers of the Bible, he did not fear it. He wanted it. Late one night, he bribed his way into the church. Gold clinked into the drunkard watchman's hand, and the door opened without resistance. The merchant walked straight to the altar, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. He laid his palms on the cover. He did not beg for forgiveness. He demanded fortune. The Bible responded. At first, a breath, a sigh, like wind in a crypt. Then, words. Not cruel this time, not accusing. Sweet, seductive. A lullaby for the damned. You have stolen, lied, betrayed. Good. That means you belong to me. Do you want more? Riches? Power? Say yes, and I will give. The merchant's throat tightened. What must I do? The whisper smiled through the pages. A gift for a gift. Gold is nothing. I want fire. I want smoke. I want walls of prayer to fall. The merchant's eyes widened. He understood. The church itself. That night, flames bloomed in the sanctuary. Candles tipped, curtains ignited, smoke clawed at the rafters like black fingers. By dawn, the people of the town stood weeping in the square as their holy walls crumbled to ash. But the Bible survived. Not a corner singed, not a page torn. And the merchant? He was gone. His home emptied, his coffers missing. Some swore they saw him leaving town with wagons full of gold, his laughter echoing against the hills. Others said they saw no wagons at all, only his shadow walking beside the smoke. Father Elias stood before the ruins, the Bible still gleaming on the altar's charred stone. His people asked if God had spared it. But Elias's eyes told another story. It was not spared. It was chosen. And in the hush of that blackened dawn, he swore he heard it breathing. Episode 7, The Curse of Silence. They gathered in the ruins of the church, the whole town. The air still smelled of smoke and ash, but no one cared. They wanted answers. The Bible sat on a blackened altar stone, unburned, unbroken. Some said it was a relic of God. Others whispered it was the devil's diary. But all agreed on one thing: it must be tested. So they decided to read it together. Father Elias opened the book before them, his voice steady as he read the first verse. His lips moved. The candlelight flickered, but he heard nothing. Only the sound of his own breath, the crackle of fire from the torches. Then he saw their faces. A woman clutched her chest, eyes wide with terror. A butcher dropped his knife and fell to his knees. A soldier spat curses into the dirt, trying to drown out a voice no one else could hear. Elias froze. He understood. The Bible was speaking, but not to him. Not to all of them, only to the guilty. Chaos erupted. Some shouted, "I hear it, it knows me," while others screamed, "Liar, you're pretending." Neighbors turned on neighbors. Husbands accused wives. Wives accused husbands. Children pointed at parents with trembling hands. One man cried, "It says I stole from my brother." Another howled, "It's calling me a murderer." The crowd tore itself apart, suspicion slicing deeper than knives. Those who claimed to hear the whisper were branded sinners. Those who claimed silence were branded liars. And the Bible lay open, its pages fluttering, though no wind stirred. Elias tried to close it, but his hands shook. To him it was nothing but paper. To them, it was judgment. A judgment that sowed doubt sharper than steel. By night's end, families no longer spoke. Doors were bolted. Friends avoided each other's eyes. The town had not burned with fire this time. It burned with silence. The silence of neighbors who no longer trusted each other. The silence of sins whispered in the dark. The silence that was worse than any scream. And in the heart of that silence, the Bible waited. Because silence too is a sin. Episode 8, The Night of Seven Voices. The town no longer slept. Doors barred, candles burned to the wick. But whispers don't wait for sleep, they choose it. It began with one scream, then another, and another. By midnight, 7 homes echoed with the same terror. A widow woke to the sound of her dead husband's voice, accusing her of the poison in his cup. A soldier heard the cries of children he left on a battlefield. A seamstress clutched her sheets as the whisper listed every stolen coin hidden in her hem. A judge, once proud of his verdicts, trembled as the Bible recited the names of innocents he had condemned. A drunkard choked on his own breath as a whisper replayed the night he buried someone alive. A baker sobbed, remembering a famine and the food he hoarded for himself. And a mother, shaking, heard the one sin she never dared admit, the child she had wished had never been born. 7 voices, 7 sinners, all at once. Neighbors burst into the streets, drawn by the screams. They saw the 7, each writhing, each clutching their ears, each answering to sins no one else could hear. And yet the torment was real. Their eyes rolled white. Their throats tore with cries that did not belong to the living. Father Elias rushed from house to house, Bible clutched to his chest, though he had not opened it. He shouted prayers, but the prayers drowned in the storm of whispers. The book's cover grew warm, pulsing like a heartbeat, as if feeding on their confessions. By dawn, the 7 lay broken, alive but hollow-eyed, staring at nothing. They no longer spoke, they no longer moved. The town began to whisper a new story. The Bible did not belong to one sinner. It belonged to all. And if it could speak to 7 in one night, what would happen if it chose everyone? That morning, Father Elias locked the Bible beneath the altar, burying it under chains and stone. But deep inside, he knew. The book had not been silenced. It had only been waiting. Episode 9, The Priest's Secret Sin. For weeks, Father Elias had stood firm. He told himself he was different, protected, pure. But purity is a fragile shield, and sin always finds its way through. The Bible lay chained beneath the altar, its cover pressed against stone, its pages sealed by iron. Yet Elias could not sleep. Night after night, he woke to the sound of his own name whispered in the dark. At first he thought it was the wind, then the dream of a guilty mind. Until one night the voice did not wait for sleep. It came while he prayed. "Elias." The whisper slithered up from the stone floor, cold as grave dirt, curling into his ears. His heart slammed against his ribs. He tried to ignore it, clutching his rosary, muttering Hail Marys until his throat grew raw. But the voice laughed. "Shall I tell them what you did? Shall I show them what you buried beneath the cloth of your priesthood?" Elias shook his head violently. "No, I have no sin. I serve only God." His cry rang out through the empty church, desperate, hollow. The chains below rattled. The stone beneath his knees grew warm. And then the whisper pressed harder, sharper, crueler. "You think you were righteous when you looked away. When the orphan begged for bread and you turned him aside. When the girl wept for mercy and you kept silent. When the soldier demanded blessing and you lied with your hand on his head." Elias's blood ran cold. He had buried those memories deep. Choices, compromises, shadows he never named aloud. Yet the book unearthed them like bones in shallow soil. He screamed, pounding the altar with his fists. "Stop! I did what I had to do. I am not guilty." But the whisper did not argue. It only repeated his name, again and again, until it became not a word but a sentence. By dawn, Father Elias sat trembling in the pews, his eyes hollow, his lips moving silently, as if still in debate with the invisible voice. The congregation found him there. They thought he had spent the night in prayer. They called him holy. But only Elias knew the truth. The Bible had spoken his sin, and worse, it had only spoken the beginning. Episode 10, The Town That Feared the Bible. The church no longer smelled of incense. It smelled of iron, wax, and fear. After the 7 voices, after the thief, after the merchant's fire, the people had seen enough. They no longer called it holy. They no longer called it God's word. They called it the curse. One by one, townsfolk gathered in the ruins. Men carried chains. Women carried salt. Children pressed their faces to their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed with terror. They had come not to worship, but to bury. Father Elias stood at the altar, the Bible before him. Its cover gleamed in the torchlight, unburned, untarnished, as if mocking their fear. He wanted to cast it into the river, to drown it in the black current. But he knew, deep down, it would only float back, so they sealed it instead. Beneath the church, in a crypt of stone, they chained it to a pillar. 12 locks, 7 seals of wax, crosses painted on every wall. As the last lock clanged shut, the people cheered, not with joy, but with relief. They thought it was finished. They thought they were free. But that night the whispers began again. Not from the crypt, from their homes. In the baker's cottage, a husband woke screaming his wife's name, hearing her sins hissed into his ear. In the seamstress's loft, a child cried, begging the voice to stop describing the grave she had never seen. In the judge's manor, he sat upright in bed, pale as the Bible recited verdicts he had signed with blood. The locks meant nothing. The chains meant nothing. The book was buried, but its voice was not. By dawn, the entire town buzzed with paranoia. Neighbors avoided each other's eyes, afraid to guess who had heard what. At the well, no one spoke. At the market, silence hung heavier than the coins. And worse, some claimed the whispers no longer waited for the guilty. They swore the book had begun to choose. Even the children. Father Elias stood before his people, trembling. The church was gone. The crypt sealed. But the curse had spread like smoke, invisible and unstoppable. And though the book lay locked in the dark, its voice still climbed the stairs, seeped through the stones, and curled around the ears of the town. The people no longer feared God. They feared the Bible. Episode 11, The Blood on the Pages. There is always one who believes courage can silence curses. But courage in the wrong hands is only another sin. His name was Abram. A stonemason with arms hardened by years of labor and a tongue sharpened by blasphemy. He did not fear God, nor priest, nor whisper. It is only paper, he told the people, only words. That night, he broke into the crypt. The lock snapped under his hammer, the seals melted beneath his knife. The chains fell, one by one, until the Bible lay free. Its cover gleamed in the torchlight as though it had been waiting. Abram spat on the altar stone. Speak. Then, if you are so mighty, speak. He opened it. The whisper rushed out like a gasp of breath held too long. His name, his sins, the thefts no one knew, the betrayals even he had forgotten. The book spoke them all, but Abram did not cower. He laughed, a coarse, ugly laugh that echoed through the crypt. Then I will silence you. And with a roar, he tore a page. The church shook, the torches guttered, the whisper turned into a scream. Abram stared in horror. The page in his hand was bleeding, thick, dark rivulets dripping between his fingers, staining the stone floor. The blood pulsed warm, alive. He dropped it, but the page clung to his skin as though fused. He clawed at it, desperate. But the words on the parchment burned themselves into his flesh, carving lines of scripture across his palm. By dawn, they found him kneeling in the crypt, his eyes wide, his body still, his hand pressed against his chest as though in prayer. But when they pried his fingers open, they saw the truth. The torn page was gone. And where it had been, Abram's veins ran black, swollen with scripture, words crawling beneath his skin like worms. The Bible sat before him, untouched, whole, every page in place. But now its edges were no longer golden. They glistened crimson. And Father Elias, staring at the corpse, whispered the only thought that came to him. The book does not lose pages. It takes them back in blood. Episode 12. The Whisper That Spread. Sin does not stay in one place. It travels, and so did the whisper. The town had sealed the church, barred its doors, and sworn to forget the Bible. But forgetting sin is like forgetting breath. It cannot be done. It began with the merchant caravans. Travelers who passed through the town at dusk left with more than goods. They left with voices in their ears. One man confessed to murder in a market square miles away. Another screamed in his sleep until he slit his own throat to stop the whisper. The Bible had never moved. It remained chained in the crypt, heavy and silent, yet its voice went with them, carried not by pages, not by ink, but by sin itself. Everywhere sinners walked, the whisper followed. In a distant tavern, a gambler dropped dead after shouting the names of the men he had cheated. On a battlefield, soldiers abandoned their posts, shrieking of crimes they had hidden under the fog of war. In a monastery, monks tore their robes when the whisper exposed vows they had broken in silence. The curse was no longer a secret of one town. It had become a plague. And still, Father Elias prayed. He knelt above the crypt, begging God for mercy, begging him to take back what had never belonged to men. But the silence of heaven was heavier than stone. That night, Elias dreamt. He saw the Bible, not chained but open, its pages spreading like wings. Each feather was scripture. Each feather whispered a sin. And those whispers rode the wind, circling the world, searching for ears to pierce. When Elias woke, he knew the truth. The Bible was not bound by place. It was bound by sin. And sin was everywhere. At dawn, travelers once again left town, and with them went the whispers, curling into their souls, ready to bloom in far-off lands. The Bible had not escaped. It had expanded, and the priest, trembling before his empty pews, realized what was coming. If every sinner could hear the voice, then soon the whole world would. Episode 13. The Pilgrimage of Sinners. They came like moths to fire, drawn by a whisper no one else could hear. At first it was one man, then a dozen, then hundreds. By the time autumn bled into winter, the roads leading to the ruined church swarmed with shadows. Thieves, murderers, adulterers, liars, faces hollow with guilt, eyes burning with hunger. They called it a pilgrimage, not to God, to the Bible. The townsfolk barred their doors. They watched from windows as strangers knelt in the ashes of the old sanctuary, pressing their foreheads to the charred stones, trembling as they begged the chained book for its voice. And it spoke, not in one tongue, in many. Some heard it as their mother, others as the lover they betrayed. Some swore it spoke in the voice of their dead children. Each sinner heard exactly what would break them. The churchyard became a hive of confessions, screams, sobs, moans of terror carried on the wind, echoing into the hills. Sinners clawed at their own skin, desperate to purge themselves. Some laughed as they shouted their sins aloud, proud at last to be known. Others tore their throats raw, trying to silence the voice. Father Elias stood at the edge of it all, powerless. His prayers drowned in the chorus of whispers, his sermons ignored. For the first time, he was no longer a shepherd, only a witness. One night, as the moon bled red over the ruins, he saw them, thousands now. A sea of shadows bowed before the chained Bible. Their voices rose together in a hymn not written in any holy book. It was not worship, it was surrender. And as the voices merged into one, the Bible's chains rattled, the stone walls groaned. The ground itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of so much sin. Elias fell to his knees, his heart breaking. He understood. The Bible had never needed to travel. It had simply waited, because sinners always come. And when they come together, the whisper becomes a roar. Episode 14. The Priest's Last Sermon. The town was no longer a town. It was a graveyard of voices. Every night the sinners gathered, kneeling before the chained Bible. Every dawn the streets reeked of sweat, ash, and shame. The people no longer prayed to God, they prayed to the whisper. Father Elias could endure no more. On the seventh day, as the crowd swarmed the church ruins, he climbed the altar steps. His robe was torn, his eyes sunken, but his voice thundered like it had when he first took holy vows. "Listen to me," he cried. "This book is not salvation. It is your damnation." The mob fell silent. Thousands of eyes turned to him, eyes hollowed by guilt, fevered with desire. Elias lifted the Bible high, its chains dragging across the stone. He doused it with oil, struck a torch, and raised the flame. This ends tonight. But before the fire touched it, the Bible opened. Pages fluttered in a storm of invisible wind. The whisper did not creep this time. It roared. It did not choose one sinner, or 7, or even 100. It spoke to all of them, and it named their sins. One by one, like the tolling of a bell, the book spat secrets into the night air. The adulterer's shame, the thief's lies, the murderer's hidden grave, the mother's cursed wish, the priest's silent betrayal. The crowd erupted. Some fell weeping, clawing at their skin. Others screamed at neighbors, at lovers, at children. Accusations cracked like whips. Families tore apart in seconds. Elias dropped the torch. His hands shook. He tried to shout a prayer, but the Bible's voice drowned him. His sermon was no longer his own. It belonged to the book. And then, as the flames finally kissed the cover, something happened Elias could never have imagined. The fire spread to the altar, to the rafters, to the walls, but not to the Bible. Its pages glowed, not with ash, but with light. A sickly, red light that pulsed like a beating heart. Elias stared, horrified, as the whispers twisted into laughter. The crowd scattered, shrieking into the night. And above it all, the Bible's voice rang out clear. You cannot burn what was never written by men. The priest fell to his knees, the torch clattering beside him. His last sermon had failed. His faith had failed. And in the silence after the screams, Elias knew one truth more terrible than any sin. The Bible could not be destroyed. It could only be obeyed. Episode 15. The Bible that couldn't be burned. The fire consumed everything. The altar, the pews, the very bones of the church. But when the embers cooled, the Bible remained. Father Elias stood in the ruins, ash clinging to his skin, his eyes hollow with defeat. Around him, the town lay silent. Broken by revelations no priest could mend, families destroyed, friendships severed, love turned to hate, all because of the whisper. The chains had melted, the locks lay twisted in the soot, yet the book itself gleamed, untouched, as though it had been waiting for this moment. Elias lifted it with trembling hands. He thought of the river, of burying it deep beneath the current where no one could reach it. He thought of fleeing, of carrying it far into the wilderness to die with it in his arms. But the whisper came before he could move, not soft, not tempting, commanding. You cannot hide me. You cannot hold me. I do not belong to you. I belong to every sin still unspoken. Elias screamed, hurling the book into the ashes. For the first time in his life, he doubted everything. The church, God, even his own soul. He fell to his knees and wept until the sky grew pale. When dawn broke, the Bible was gone. No one saw who took it. No one saw where it went. Some said a stranger came in the night, cloaked and silent, lifting it from the ruins. Others swore it simply walked away, its pages turning as though guided by unseen hands. Weeks later, whispers rose in another village. A farmer's wife who confessed sins she never told. A soldier who awoke screaming. A child who cried out a name no one had ever spoken aloud. The curse had moved. The book had found a new home. And as Father Elias wandered the empty roads, a broken man with nothing left to pray to, he heard the voice one final time. Not from the ground, not from the air, from inside him. I only speak to sinners, and that means you.
Epilogue, The Last Whisper. The Bible is no longer in the ruins. It is no longer chained in stone. It is closer than that. Closer than you think. You may not see it on the shelf, or hear its pages turning in the night. But listen, in the quiet, when the world sleeps, when even your thoughts feel too loud, do you hear it? That voice, that name, yours, because the Bible only speaks to sinners, and it is speaking now.